Hello, I'm your host, Brian Callanan. Who will fill a new vacancy on the City Council? What impact will newly approved upzoning rules have on Seattle's affordable housing crisis? And what's next with the Council's move to approve a Human Services Director to oversee the city's homelessness efforts? Council members Mike O'Brien and Kshama Sawant answer these questions and the ones you're sending in too, next on Council Edition.
As a socialist, I think density is an integral component of creating livable urban spaces.
I want really good, passionate people to share my values, but I think it's appropriate for the voters to have a chance to look at some new faces.
All that and more coming up next on City Inside Out, Council Edition. And here they are, Councilmembers Kshama Sawant and Mike O'Brien. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll jump right into it here. And Councilmember O'Brien, I was going to start with how you're going to finish off your final term on council, but Rob Johnson somehow beat you to it here. And we will get back to your plans, I promise here. But your reaction to Councilmember Johnson's resignation, effective April 5th, and the process now ahead to fill his seat.
Yeah, you know, I've really enjoyed working with Councilmember Johnson for a little over 3 years, and we've actually worked together for probably a dozen years before that in kind of environmental advocacy stuff. So, so I have a lot of respect for Rob and the work he's done, and he's going to be missed. You know, it's always hard when you have someone who's on the team and doing work and set up to go to have them step out. We'll have to jump in with a new process and recruit people, and that's going to start. But Rob will be missed, and but you know, wish him the best. And I know he's got a lot of exciting stuff in his future. So good for him.
All right, Councilmember Sawant, I know there will be a decision in the next few weeks from now to pick an interim council member until the November election for Councilmember Johnson's District 4 seat. I'm trying to figure out who that person should be. One of the 9 candidates running for the job. It's just an important position in so many ways. I think about the budget process that's coming up in November. Who do you want to see fill that seat?
First of all, I think we should look back to how ordinary people and activists organized. The last time there was an open position when I think it was Councilmember Burgess went to take a pro tem position for the mayor's office. And rather than have just a rubber stamped city council approach where somebody like John Okamoto was appointed without any public engagement, without people even knowing what was going on. That was one way of doing it. The other way of doing it was a grassroots approach where we had in City Hall, we had a meeting where over 100 ordinary people came and really talked about what they want in that council position, what they want to see. And I think that's where we have to go. It has to be about the issues. And as you said, very important decisions are made in the budget. You know, so this year, as you see so many candidates running for election, some are running for re-election, I think this is a strategic year for ordinary people and activist organizations to ask, what is the council going to do to solve the affordable housing and homelessness crisis? What is it going to do to address the really long-lasting question of municipal broadband? Are you going to serve corporate interests, or are you going to serve working people?
A lot ahead with that, and thank you for breaking those different pieces down. I'm going to try to shift, if I can, into some work that Councilmember Johnson was doing right up to the time he's leaving here, the passage of some very significant legislation that he helped guide to the finish line, Mandatory Housing Affordability, or MHA. So this is a set of rules, folks, that requires developers around the 27 neighborhood hubs to build affordable housing or pay into a housing fund in exchange for buildings with increased height or floor area. I'll throw in a few tweets to start off the conversation. Here's one. MHA increases costs for developers, typically 5 to 10%. Guess what? Rents are going to go up. Thank you for that tweet. Here's one from Councilmember Gonzalez, who wrote, in the past year, the city has lost 700 plus affordable housing units due to the delay in MHA implementation. We need affordable housing now. Mike, what impact do you think MHA is going to have on rents in our city, in your district, and in the area overall?
I think overall it's going to be a very positive impact. So, you know, we're seeing a lot of growth in the city, and I don't think the MHA is going to really change that. It's going to continue to be a desirable city for people to move to for a variety of reasons. But what it allows us to do is all that new construction that's going to continue to happen, whether it's commercial skyscrapers downtown or apartment buildings or small, you know, variety of different options, they will all be required to provide affordable housing now.
You don't think it'll push up rents? That's always the question I hear from people.
That cost goes somewhere, and so you know, there's a lot of economists that have looked at it. I think over the long term, what you'll see is the cost of property goes down a bit. We also, this wasn't just an imposition of cost. We gave people additional floor area, additional height, whatever. And, we won't get the mix perfect, but the concept was we're going to increase the value of your property by allowing you to build slightly bigger buildings, but then we're going to require you to contribute that value back in the form of affordable housing. So it should be about neutral. Okay. It's an expensive place to live. New construction is always expensive, but the idea that we'll have 6,000 or so additional units of affordable housing won't solve the crisis, but it certainly helps.
Yeah, and Kshama, I'll bring you in here because there's been some criticism, and I know you've heard this from advocates, that MHA didn't go far enough, that 6,000 affordable units in 10 years really won't have that much of an impact. Some people were asking for even more. Had a tweet in from Melissa who writes, "Where are the impact fees as they have in Bellevue? And schools are amenities? This is progress." And I know that you've provided a critical voice in the council for many years, a dissenting vote on many pieces of legislation the council has looked at. Why did you support MHA?
Well, as I've said in my council contributions on the mandatory housing affordability legislation, I personally support density. As a socialist, I think density is an integral component of creating livable urban spaces that actually work for ordinary working people in order to have schools, clinics, libraries, places of work, parks, everything close to where they live. And I personally grew up in Mumbai, which is a very dense city. And in fact, I grew up in a 400 square foot flat in Mumbai, where which was the only thing that parents, working class parents like my parents could afford. And so I personally strongly support density, and that was part of the reason why I voted for MHA. But during the whole discussion on MHA, I made it very clear that a lot of the claims that economists and others are making about what this particular MHA legislation will do for affordability have been greatly exaggerated. The reality is that the city at this moment has no way of counting, statistically having an account of the net affordability that we have. And it's not because or without MHA. It's very confusing when MHA is introduced in the equation. People make it either it's the it's the best thing that ever happened since sliced bread, or it's the greatest evil. It's neither. Really, I think we have to step back and understand the questions are about whether most of the development is by for-profit developers, or is it mostly, which it is not today, which is it mostly publicly owned affordable housing, which is going to be affordable permanently for ordinary people. So I think rather than just focus on MHA, I think it's important to focus on some of the key statistics that show why this crisis exists. The crisis in our city is not because the city hasn't built enough. I mean, Seattle has been the construction crane capital for 3 years running.
Right.
And construction has boomed. Does that mean we don't need more housing? Yes, absolutely, we need it. But it's what kind? We need affordable housing. It doesn't help when you have for-profit developers building units that are at luxury rents that are unaffordable to most people. So at the same time that you've seen the boom of construction, you see in some cases double-digit vacancy rates. So at the same time that people want to live here and need housing, there are empty apartments sitting vacant as we speak. And that's why the key question is affordability. And if you don't talk about bold policies like rent control and then funding a massive expansion of affordable housing by taxing big business, you're really missing the point.
Hold that thought for just a second. I do want to come back to that. But if I could, I want to shift a little bit towards a piece of legislation Councilmember Herbold is working on. The mayor's talked about this as well, wanting to mitigate displacement and preserve so-called naturally affordable housing, meaning older buildings where the rent isn't so high. Now, I know the concern is with the passage of MHA, some of these older, cheaper rent buildings might be torn down and more expensive buildings might go up. I know, Councilmember Sawant, you recently met with some renters at the Chateau, an older building in the Center District. What'd you hear from them? How might the council help out in a situation like that?
Well, the crisis that the tenants at the Chateau apartments this is in the heart of the Central District are facing is really just a microcosm of the crisis we're seeing not only in Seattle, but in the entire region, where in this case, Cadence, a corporate developer with 185 million real estate portfolio, not the largest corporation, but it's a corporate developer corporation nonetheless, which has decided to target this building because it's somewhat older and it's not the most lavish building. But there are working class families who are living here, everywhere from people who have lived for 40 years and are hoping to retire and die here, to new families, young families with an infant who have just moved in here, who have moved in from homelessness. So now these tenants are being told that because this developer wants to make double-digit profits, and they say that on their own website, because they want to make like 25 or over net profits, what's going to happen is that this building is going to be demolished,
Yeah.
and higher rent units are going to be built. So these tenants are going to be displaced. Some of them are going to end up in homelessness. So that's why we are fighting this struggle, but it's part of the larger struggle.
And Mike, I want to bring you in here because I know you and other council members have raised some concerns about this concept, wondering if preserving natural affordable units would truly be a gain for affordable housing overall. What impact do you think an anti-displacement law would have?
Yeah, well, let me be clear. I fully support Councilmember Herbold's work on this. And it's challenging. Our ability as a city to protect some affordable housing that's not subsidized, but is just market rate, but happens to be affordable, usually because it's older, not large units. But these are, we don't have enough subsidized housing to meet the needs. So we rely on all this housing stock that's older to meet the needs. And we need to have better tools to protect it. And unfortunately, state law restricts a lot of the things we can do. And so Councilmember Herbold has been working diligently on this, not since she's been a council member, but for years. And I think there's a path here. This is not also going to radically change things, but it would help in some instances. And we really could use the state legislature to help with some more tenant protections too, to protect them.
I guess I'm looking at this though, it doesn't, the law that she's considering here wouldn't do anything to ensure that that housing would remain affordable in the future. I mean, there's no way to actually control that piece of it. That's the
right, exactly. We don't have rent stabilization authority right now. We're trying to be creative, and Councilmember Sawant's been great on finding creative ways to work around that.
I just worry about the legal challenges or whatever else going on.
Yeah, and those are, we're always playing on the edge of that, and so we'll have to look at that. I think what this may do, though, is you go into a neighborhood and there's an empty lot, and there's a building that has some affordable market rate in it, and a developer's looking like, I want to build something new in the neighborhood. We're going to make it a little harder to build in that existing apartment building, so maybe they choose to build on the empty lot where they don't displace anyone, and we get the housing, and that's simplistic for sure, but those are the types of decisions we'd like to see people made. In the long term, obviously, we're going to need more tools.
Got a bit of a fine line there. You wanted to say something.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to our discussion something really fascinating and interesting that has just happened. Actually, the news story broke out only yesterday from a policy decision that was taken the day before. So like on Tuesday, I think. This is a story from Port Coquitlam, which is a suburb of Vancouver. I also have to be careful how I can't say it.
No, it's good pronunciation. Worked for me, yeah.
It's a suburb of Vancouver. That's easier to say. But that city authority has just passed a bylaw that says that in the cases of, and the law talks about predatory developers, who are intending to carry out renovictions, and this is a very common parlance now in British Columbia, that if the business model of a corporate developer is to buy up buildings and then in a predatory way, like not with the intention of maintaining those tenants in an affordable way, instead to renovate it or demolish and build new units. Either way, it's a type of newness to the building. But if it is attached to evictions, automatic evictions, so renovictions. So in this case, the bylaw is saying that if predatory developers are going to carry out a renoviction, then what they need to do is to move during the period of the construction, they need to move their tenants to other affordable homes and then bring them back, give them the right of return at the same rent as before. This is, as far as I know, unheard of, and I think it is going to the going to the crux of the issue, and it's not surprising that Vancouver is talking about this, because all the way from Vancouver to Los Angeles and all the way from the Bay Area to New York City, we're facing a massive housing crisis in metropolitan areas. So I think we have to keep our eyes out for bold policies. And when I say bold, I don't just mean technologically or technocratically bold. I mean bold as in policies that are guaranteed not to get the agreement of big developers, corporate landlords, big corporations like Amazon. And often that's a rule of thumb. If they don't like it, you're probably on the right track. And the problem with MHA is the reason it is so mild and really does very little to tackle the heart of the crisis is that was the only thing that was acceptable to the corporate developers that Mayor Murray and the Democratic establishment got to the table. They vetoed rent control. They vetoed development impact fees, which I think Councilmember Bryan actually has done a lot of work on, but the establishment has not supported. They vetoed any idea of taxing big business for social housing. So if they veto all all the real policies that will solve the problems,
Right.
then that is not an evidence-based approach.
Can I talk to you, though, just to broaden it a little bit? I know you and other council members have lobbied state lawmakers before about issues like rent control. You were down there very recently. I haven't seen a lot of movement on rent control this session. I know Oregon's been working on that. But we have seen the state move towards eviction reform this session, extending the notice period for people who might get evicted, among other changes. Bipartisan support for this down in Olympia. Does that say anything to you about where the pendulum might be moving here?
I think the pendulum is definitely starting to move in the correct direction, primarily because ordinary people and renters and really grassroots organizations like Washington Community Action Network have really shown tremendous leadership in pushing the issues on evictions. And, the reforms that I think can and will happen at the state level are critical because unlike many other states like New York State, Washington State has very, very bad laws on eviction. And in fact, it ties the laws of the land in Washington State tie the hands of the judges in ruling in favor of tenants, even if they rationally would want to. So I think those are necessary components of housing justice. But added to that, we also have to talk about housing affordability because, for example, in District 3, what you see in the study from the Housing Justice Project is that one household is evicted every other day. I mean, this is a stunning measure of the crisis. And it is not only because of unfavorable state laws at the judiciary, which we need to change, but also because the rents are just too high, and that's leading to evictions.
I wondered, Mike, if I could stick with action at our state capitol for a little bit. I'm going to switch gears just a little here. An unfortunate turn, some would say, for safety advocates. This block the box bill has died down in Olympia. This was the idea Seattle was pushing, to use traffic cameras to enforce the bus-only zones or blocking crosswalks, things of that nature. Your concerns about this, and maybe this larger picture of trying to make Seattle's Vision Zero concept to come true, to avoid these pedestrian deaths, et cetera.
Yeah. You know, we obviously have a lot of congestion in our city. And when there's a lot of congestion, people get frustrated. We have very clear rules that I think everyone really knows. You're not supposed to cross through that intersection until there's a spot on the other side. The bus lanes are for buses and in some instances bikes only. And yet people get frustrated and break those rules. It happens. We need to have some tools to enforce that. The only tool we have right now is to put a uniformed police officer out there. And it does a couple things. One is it's usually pretty effective because when they see a police officer there, they won't break the rules. But we can't put a police officer in every bus lane and every intersection.
I've seen them on West Seattle Bridge, that's for sure.
When they do violate, you know, the police officer, they pull someone over in the middle of an intersection, it just makes the congestion even worse too. So there's technology today that allows us to use automated enforcement, so cameras to look at people. And if everyone knows that I'm tempted to break the rule because I'm frustrated, but I know there's a camera on the street and I'm going to get caught. And we catch them with that. We send them a ticket. We don't delay traffic any more than it is already. We know that we get really good responses, but we need some help from Olympia. And it's unfortunate that bill died. There's still some strategies where we can work that. And we're hearing from, you know, I commute by bike every day. And so I see this every single day. And it's frustrating when the lane's blocked. But with my bicycle, I can get through. You talk to disability rights advocates and they talk to someone in a wheelchair. You know, do they wait for the next light? Do they roll their wheelchair out into traffic? It is a real hindrance on people that are the most vulnerable roadway users and sidewalk users. And so we have to get this right. Okay,
I know a lot of work still ahead on that. Kshama, I'm going to head back to you and talk about the process for the council to confirm a new human services director, the person who would oversee our city's homeless response. Mayor Durkin nominated Jason Johnson, the acting director of the HSD. She did not use a competitive process, which is not completely uncommon, but I know some members of that department have raised some concerns. You've declined to give him a hearing. Why did you not want to give him a hearing? What's next on this?
Well, when the nomination packet first came to my Human Services Committee, we immediately heard from community members who care about the issues that affect homeless people, homeless community members themselves, but also I think very significantly from a large number of Human Services Department employees themselves, workers at the City of Seattle who were expressing deep concerns about the fact that the mayor had promised them that there would be a transparent and accountable search which would incorporate the city's agreed upon race and social justice principles. And none of that was done. And in fact, my office, through my committee, has been asking the mayor's office for months, all of last year, all the way from February of last year till November of last year. We've been asking them, what are you going to do about appointing the permanent director? We had no word from them. And then suddenly in December, without any notification or engagement of anybody, the mayor's office said that they had their nomination ready. And as I said, immediately after that, we heard from a number of people, including human services employees. And I think it's important to stress that it wasn't just the case of one or two disgruntled employees who had private issues that they wanted to talk about. This is 130 members of Protect 17, which is the union that represents at least half of the employees, workers in the department, and hundreds of employees of the department having spoken or courageously in my committee meetings twice, and having sent emails or made phone calls. So this, I just want to stress to your viewers what courage it takes for workers to speak out openly, essentially against their boss. The mayor is their boss. So for them to speak out openly against what they thought was not a transparent approach to nominating the leadership of the department, that takes a lot of courage. And I have to say, I'm deeply disappointed that, although not maybe surprised, that the mayor decided to characterize these meetings where all these courageous workers came and spoke. She has characterized those meetings as circus-like. I really find that not good leadership in any way, because you are responsible for listening to your constituents and the workers of the city.
She's not here to defend herself, and I want to make sure that I'll get Mike's opinion here too. Your concerns about this process to find a permanent leader for the Human Services Department. I know there's some urgency certainly behind this. The city's trying to coordinate its homeless efforts with King County, et cetera. Your thoughts about this process going forward?
I share the concerns that Councilmember Sawant mentioned, and have supported, her efforts to date. I've had a long relationship with Jason Johnson, and I actually work well with him. I think he does great work. As a council member, we don't see all aspects of anyone's leadership, and so we rely on processes and employees to talk about that. And so my personal action, I think highly of Mr. Johnson, but I also have a ton of respect for a lot of the workers at the Human Service Department who have expressed concerns. And to be clear, most of them are saying, we just want a process. We want to make sure that we can have the best leader possible. And you mentioned, Brian, that, mayors do different processes, and there's different ways to do that, and we've allowed some flexibility in the past. And Councilmember Mosqueda is pushing a resolution to really shift that, which is great
for future nominations.
And I look at this; it's a high-profile job. Everyone in the city knows that how we're addressing homelessness is probably the #1 issue that any elected official should be dealing with, and this is the position that matters. So it is extremely important that this be a thorough process. We do it for Department of Transportation. We do it for Seattle City Light. I think Human Service should have a process, and I wish that the mayor would do it. It's pretty clear she's not going to do it. We'll see what happens in committee in the next few days, and it's too bad that the mistake on process is going to have a lot of bad blood now in that department, where we have some really amazing people that are frustrated, and their likely new boss will have known that a bunch of people were upset with them, and I hope they can navigate and bring people back together, because we need that department more than any other department in the city to really well-functioning set of human beings.
Briefly, if you could.
Yes, just one other issue to add to just describe how serious the situation is also, is that in addition to hundreds of employees having spoken courageously, we also, some weeks ago, we saw the survey results, a survey that was taken last year of the Human Services Department, showing the confidence of the workers in management precipitously dropping in a 2-year period. That is a real crisis for anybody who's going to take on leadership of that, and certainly for the mayor's office, who ultimately is to whom the department reports to. I think these are real questions, regardless of which side you've been on the specific nomination question. I think with any seriousness, we have to admit that this is a crisis. And I also just wanted to add that this is also not just about a department or about a leadership position. This crisis also is situated in the larger crisis of homelessness and just not having enough funding. And I think really at the bottom line is it reflects the failure of the political establishment to take on any aspect of significantly addressing this crisis. So not only did the majority of the council repeal the Amazon tax and take away the momentum which we need to rebuild now to have funding for social housing, but we also see services in the absence of affordable housing services, being nickel and dimed every single day. So that's at the heart of all this.
Yeah, those service pieces are going to be a big part of this going forward, and thanks for bringing that up. But I wanted to make sure I shifted gears to one thing here, because, Mike, with all these exciting issues to deal with, I don't know why you wouldn't want to run for your position again. I did want to make sure I asked you what motivated your decision not to run again in November, maybe some insight on how the political landscape of Seattle has changed since you took office in 2009.
Yeah, it's changed significantly since I came into office, and that's a piece of it. To be clear, there's a big piece of me that would love to keep working. I really like the work. I like to think that I'm adding value to it. It's a position of power, and we got to use that power carefully and judiciously, but it's something that I'm really grateful that the people of Seattle have let me do for the last 10 years. Yeah. And it's been 10 years. Yeah. It feels like it was just yesterday, but 10 years is a long time. And when I was on the outside, I never felt like people should hold these positions for terribly long. I never set a certain date or deadline for that. Mm-hmm. I thought about, am I done? And the answer was no. I got way more things I want to do, but at 14 years, I'd have more. At 18 years, I'd have more. And so it seems like a good break point for me. The other thing I'll just say is it's a demanding job. A lot of jobs are, but this one in particular. And I survive. My kids were in elementary school when I started. They're going off to college now. I've survived in part by a network of friends and family that have really helped me out. And it's really hard to pay back those debts. In my family, carpooling to soccer means someone else drives my kids, but I don't drive their kids. There's lots of times when I'm running off to an evening meeting and it's my night to do the dishes, and I have to have someone else do the dishes. And so it's probably my turn in my circle of friends and family to step back and maybe repay some of those debts, let some other people step forward. And from the city council perspective, I think there's 11 people interested in this position right now, maybe more. And I want really good, passionate people to share my values, but I think it's appropriate for the voters to have a chance to look at some new faces, and I think that's a good thing.
Okay. Kshama, some thoughts on Mike's tenure? You've worked with him for some time
yes,
here.
And Mike is right. He's been here for 10 years. I've been here for 5 years, but I have to say, in those 5 years, it's been very clear to me that both Mike O'Brien and Nick Licata, who was here with us some years ago,
he's still alive, but he's not on council anymore.
Yes,
okay.
I didn't meet him.
Yep.
No, want him to be here for a long time. I just met in City Hall. Yep. It was very clear to me that between myself and Mike and Nick, it clearly represented a progressive wing, if you might call it. You might use a different term, but certainly a group of elected representatives who clearly care deeply about what people thought. And Mike and I have had our own share of disagreements, but at the same time, I think I don't think you can question Mike's personal commitment to the to the question of addressing climate change, addressing the transportation problems, addressing homelessness and affordable housing. And I think it's a pity that he's leaving. Okay. And I really hope that in the future the city council that is composed of I hope that the city council is composed of elected representatives who represent the interests of working people, not Amazon.
Thank you for that. Mike, I want to give you the last word here because we have some big news happening the day after that we're taping the show here. The bus is no longer going into the downtown transit tunnel. Yeah. Next phase of the Seattle Squeeze, the short version here. Your thoughts for commuters in the weeks and months ahead?
It's going to change a lot. We've got through a couple hurdles. One was unexpected, a couple weeks snowstorm there, and then of course the conversion to the tunnel from the viaduct. But so far we've done okay, and that's largely been, in part because the folks at SDOT and Metro have been doing amazing work to prep people and respond, and frankly the people of our community, folks who live and work in Seattle, have adapted, and we're going to ask them to do that again starting on Monday morning.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Mike. Thank you, Sean, for being here as well, and we'll see you next time on Council Edition.